hunger is actually just people who are constantly riding the glycemic response curve, and they're constantly spiking and dropping their blood sugar. And so they're getting low blood sugars. They're getting insulin spikes. Insulin makes you hungry.
Yeah.
So if you're constantly pulsing insulin throughout the day with sugar, you're getting hungrier because you're eating food that is making you hungrier, right? And on top of that, we get thousands of messages of food all day long to eat. And that activates the dopaminergic systems in our brain, the hedonism pathways, the pleasure pathways, the wanting and the liking of food. And that can make you think you're hungry, even though you're really you just want the food, or you just like the way food tastes.
Right.
And this is why when you're eating a multi-course meal, you're able to easily eat more food because of different foods tasting good continues to activate that pathway. And so it's not that you actually necessarily have room for all this food. It's that it's a novel experience.
Novelty factor, yeah.
Right?
Hey friends, welcome to this week's episode of the Human Podcast. This is your host, Jeffrey Wu. I had another great conversation this week with my good friend, Dr. Molly Maloof, who's not only the head of medical science at Sano Intelligence, a continuous glucose monitoring startup, but also a private doctor for prominent folks in Silicon Valley. After our last conversation with Molly in episode 55, about half a year ago, she began to experiment with intermittent fasting. We touch upon a number of aspects of fasting, its effects on the gut microbiome, the feeling of empowerment one gains over food as the body gets adapted to fasting, and Molly's N=1 fasting experiences and experiments as a woman. This is a great discussion that elucidates the frequently asked question: how does the effects of fasting differ between men and women? Hope you all enjoyed this episode as much as we did recording it. Let's get started. Great to have you back, Dr. Molly.
Thanks.
So that's weird to call you Dr. Molly, but
I know.
but no, you earned your medical degree there.
It's true.
So the last time you were on the show was 5 months ago, and a lot has happened since then. I know that you were just starting at Sano at the time, the continuous glucose monitoring company, and obviously a lot has happened since these last 5 months for you guys. A lot has happened for us at Human, where our ketone ester is finally now launched to the world. I know you've been experimenting with that, so we've got to talk about that.
Yeah.
And I know you've also been traveling a lot. So what's new? What have you been up to?
Oh my gosh. So I think around 5 months ago, I was just kind of getting interested in fasting and still was quite skeptical, but also very curious. And as I've been doing just so much research in continuous glucose monitoring and glucose metabolism, I had this, hypothesis that, okay, maybe if I fast, it'll lower my fasting glucose. Because over the last year, I had changed my nutrition and I'd lowered my postprandial glucose, so after meal glucose, pretty dramatically. And I dropped my hemoglobin A1C a whole point from like 5.6 to 4.6. But I still had
This was just through diet?
Through diet.
Okay.
But I hadn't really implemented fasting yet, and I was really curious about it. And I wanted to see what would happen to my fasting glucose if I started fasting. And I was thinking, okay, first principles, it would make sense that if you would fast, that your fasting glucose would just go down. Like, why wouldn't it go down? And over the last 2 months, I started using the app Zero, and I've been sort of chronicling it on my Instagram and going from intermittent fasting. I mean, first what I did was I did a month on keto, which I didn't really feel awesome on that month. However, I did get really well fat adapted. So that made doing intermittent fasting a lot easier for me. And then from intermittent fasting for a couple weeks, I went into like a full 24-hour fast. And then I went into like 36 hours, then 48 hours, then 52, then 63, then 72. Okay. And it just got easier. The more I fasted, the easier it got. I became better friends with one of your investors, Phil Libin, who basically like brainwashed me into believing that fasting would change my life. And I actually totally believe him now because in a lot of ways, I think, after doing, I read Jason Fung's book, The Ultimate Guide to Fasting, or The Complete Guide to Fasting. I'm such a fangirl of him at this point. He's just like such a hero. I'm trying to get him to advise Sano. I actually need you to send an intro to me for him. So fasting has it sort of came from a challenge of wanting to see what would happen to my fasting glucose. And not surprisingly, it's gone down pretty dramatically. But
where did it start and where are you at now?
It was like hovering around like 89 or so.
Okay.
And now I've gotten it down to like 80s, like early 80s. So like today, I'd eaten a bunch of food for breakfast and it was still only 83.
Okay.
And I was like, that's weird. It was pretty low carb, but still like I had enough carbs in the breakfast for it to have gotten higher. So I actually think my metabolism's been changing pretty.
Yeah, your glucose control is really, really good.
It's gotten really good. Yeah. And it's also just kind of amazing how by doing continuous glucose monitoring and then also doing ketone monitoring and also doing finger prick monitoring, I'm starting to be able to predict what my blood sugar is. And I kind of know like, oh, this is what it feels like to be like 50 and also have ketones, you know? Right. I've been doing tons of experimentation with different types of fasts and different types of fasting aids. And then just doing research on, you know, what's the science behind what would be the best type of fast for different goals. And so I'm working on my own sort of like succinct version of the Complete Guide to Fasting and really like what's scientifically backed for different lengths of fasts. And yeah, I'm kind of like a full-on fasting cult convert.
I think that's actually a good point that you bring up. There's these like broad rules around a 16-8 or a 36-hour fast.
Yeah.
But you should really take into context what your goals are and what your initial body composition is. Right?
Oh, 100% agree with that.
Like my fasting protocol has really changed since I'm marathon training.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm doing a lot shorter fast because I'm exercising a lot more.
Yeah, because you don't want to get too low body fat.
Right.
I mean, this is something that a lot of people need to think about, especially women in particular, because we are not the same as men. And I've been combing through the literature. I've been trying to find research on female hormones and fasting.
Yeah.
And I'm coming up with very little information on this because it just doesn't exist. Like if it existed, I would be able to find it. And I'm finding a little bit of data. I'm finding some animal data
on Ramadan. And women.
But the thing about Ramadan fasting,
it's not the extended fast,
is that Ramadan fasting is mostly isocaloric. Most people are, and that meaning that most people are eating the same amount of calories. They're just eating them at night.
Yeah.
They're not drinking water. And most of the time, it seems to not affect metabolism that much. You seem like it's kind of like a null metabolic, effect, which is interesting because, like, I haven't seen many studies showing any harm from Ramadan fasting, but I also haven't seen a lot of improvements in health. Right,
because you're kind of having like a 12, 14-hour fasting window. It's like not a super long fast.
You're also just eating at night, and there's really a lot of evidence suggesting that circadian rhythms actually do. We're kind of programmed to put on fat and weight if we eat at night on purpose, right? Because like if you think about evolutionary biology, it would make sense that if you spent your day hunting and then you spent your evening, maybe either if you had fire cooking and eating the food and not eating very much of it, like any type of food you had at night, like you were probably trying to store that because you knew that you didn't know what your next meal was going to be. So there's some great research coming out on circadian rhythms. And I just don't think that that Ramadan fasting necessarily is good or bad. I think it's a religious practice. But my own personal experiences with hormones, and for keto in particular, is I did a while I was doing that month on keto, I was doing a urine hormone menstrual rhythm test.
Okay.
Where I was doing multiple urine samples throughout the course of a month to track my hormones.
Yeah. And then just to be clear, like what was your macros on the keto?
I was eating less than 25 grams of carbs a day, net carbs. Yeah. And I was testing for ketosis. Okay. And I was pretty much in ketosis most of the month.
Okay. So like above 1.0 millimole.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It wasn't nearly as high as fasting ketosis I would get into, but it was still generally hovering above.
So you're legitimately eating keto.
Yeah. Okay. And this was the first time I actually tracked everything and like measured everything. And it was interesting, but I also wasn't at a major calorie deficit. So I wasn't necessarily losing weight this month. Right. I lost a little bit of water weight, but I was pretty surprised at like how my estrogen and progesterone levels went lower. And so I started thinking a lot about what is ketosis telling your body? And really, it seems like ketosis is telling your body that you're in a famine. Because typically when our ancestors were exposed to fat metabolism, it was when they didn't have access to food. Right? Or you were Eskimos, right? So you were like eating fat to stay alive. And it seems like to me, my hypothesis is that when you send those signals to your body as a woman, you're kind of saying, hey, like, resources need not go to fertility.
Right.
You should probably be trying to stay alive right now. And so survival, I think, will always trump fertility. And if your body thinks it's in a survival mode, then it would make sense for you to have an effect on your hormones. Now, at the same time,
interesting.
I do believe that there are a lot of women who have insulin resistance and have tried ketogenic diets and have actually improved their ovarian health because they've reduced the insulin resistance and overall improved their body's metabolism. So it's like, where are you beginning in terms of your metabolic health and where do you have to go? Right. So like I am starting out with like a fairly well-toned metabolism, and then you put it into ketosis, and then you put it into fasting. And now like I'm actually really curious to know like how my hormones are going to change because of this. And I'm also just curious to know like what's the best schedule for me, because eventually I do want to have kids.
Right.
But, I do like feeling leaner in the summer. I don't mind feeling a little bit softer in the winter because it's hibernation mode, right?
Yeah.
But I think we need to start doing large-scale studies on human metabolism and fasting to understand what's the best dose for everyone. Because like we know that too much food is bad for people.
Right.
And I know that like I have a family history of Alzheimer's disease, of cancer, of what else? Rheumatoid arthritis, hypercholesterolemia, and hypertension. And guess what?
What you don't have?
Fasting improves all of those things. Yeah. Like I have a list of like 40 different things that fasting does for your body. And those are pretty amazing things that can happen from just reducing food intake. So
and those are the diseases that are the top 10 killers, right? Like heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer.
Like these are, and rheumatoid arthritis, like I already have celiac, right? So I already have one autoimmune disease, and it's really common for people with autoimmunity to have more than one.
Right.
And so like if I can actually improve my immune system through fasting, like this is going to be part of my life now. Yeah. Like question is how much for what dose to keep my hormones healthy, to keep my body
balance,
weight.
Right? Like you don't go in starvation mode and like fast for 7 days and like just drop all your hormones, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like what's that balance?
Exactly. And like, well, so this is the coolest thing that's happened to me. Before starting fasting, was not able to eat dairy easily, right? So I go to Israel recently, and you asked earlier about where I've been traveling. I go to Israel, and I go to Lebanon, and I'm eating foods out there, and I've been fasting on the way there. I fasted during every plane trip I took on this trip. I took a plane, I took a flight over there, and then I went to Israel for a few days, for like a week. And then I took a flight to Cyprus, fasted, went to Lebanon, still fasted, and then on the way back through Iceland on a layover, I was fasting. So I fasted about 4 or 5 days on this whole trip out of 2 weeks. And the funniest thing is that I'm in Israel and I'm kind of like not necessarily letting myself go because I'm actually eating healthy, but there's a lot of dairy in their food there. And I don't normally eat dairy, but I ate dairy in Israel and I was just like totally tolerating it with no digestive complaints at all. And so I started learning about how fasting affects your
lactose intolerance.
Well, I just started learning about how it modulates the microbiome. So fasting, I mean, like a lot of this is preliminary animal studies, but there's evidence to suggest that fasting actually improves the health of your microbiome in a pretty significant way. And first of all, you're not exposing your gut to food for a while, so it's giving some time to heal if you have any problems. Second of all,
you're probably reducing processed carbs, which fosters a certain form of microbiome bacteria that's not necessarily optimal.
Yeah, I mean, like I think everyone would benefit from just like not eating as much sugar and refined carbs. But at the same time, like I read this study in Cell recently that it was either Cell or Nature, but basically they took two sets of animals. One, they gave ad libitum feeding, so whatever they wanted, and the other one they basically fasted every other day. And then they took another group of mice that were bred without a microbiome, and they transplanted the microbiomes of both groups into two sets of these new mice. And they found that the same clinical endpoints, the same reductions in cardiovascular endpoints like hypertension, like high cholesterol, like glucose metabolism abnormalities, they found the same effects in the mice with the transplants that were the every other day fasted mice. And then the mice that were eating whatever they wanted, which had the worsened endpoints, they had high cholesterol, they had gained weight, all these bad things had happened to them. The mice that got those microbiomes had the exact same thing happen to them. Yeah. So I think that like one of the big questions that's coming from all this to me is like, are we going to be able to develop therapeutics based on the microbiomes of people who are fasting that we can just give to people through pills and maybe give them the benefits of fasting? Without having to actually do the fast.
That's interesting. I mean, I think there's probably so many targets of how fasting it works, right? Like I think it affects microbiome, obviously affects autophagy.
Right.
There's something with just like core metabolism, but like that's an interesting endpoint of fasting, changing microbiome. And this reminds me of a conversation I had recently with a friend, Josiah Zana, who literally fecal transplanted himself.
Oh,
so
who? With whose poop?
So he had a friend with like apparently really good GI, and he's been struggling with GI issues through his life, and he literally like purified the poop of his friend.
How did he do that? What did he do to it?
I think he just like capsulized them.
Oh,
I think he literally swallowed this guy's feces.
No, this is the thing. Like I actually had
on his gut.
Yeah. Wait, did he take antibiotics?
Yeah, he took full antibiotics to destroy his entire gut microbiome.
Whoa.
And then transplanted it and said like it matched. So he successfully matched.
And then what happened afterwards?
He said he felt like his GI is great.
That's amazing. So the craziest thing about this whole world of microbiome transplants is what's really depressing about it is that it's actually incredibly hard and very, very challenging to get a microbiome transplant from a doctor.
Yeah.
Like I spent a year for one of my clients trying to get her a microbiome transplant. And finally we got it done. But it took us, you have to contact, first of all, you have to have like a team of doctors.
Okay.
You have to have a poop sample from a lab that's allowed. The clinic, like you have to clinically like contact a lab that collects poop samples essentially. And you have to basically develop a relationship with them to get that sample sent to the doctors who will then insert it through colonoscopy. If you have Crohn's disease, there's arguments of like which way you would want to get it inserted. And so in this patient's case, they wanted to do it through the colonoscopy, mostly because that's the only way the insurance would pay for it. Like they wouldn't pay for it any other way. Yeah. So she had to go to the hospital, be sedated, and have this inserted into her. Yeah. And to me, it's just like, really? Did it, like, why would it have to take that much time and effort? Like, if this is something that somebody can just do at home, you know?
Well, I would say that Jess, he's a pretty experienced biohacker, but I mean, it sounds like
there are risks for sure. You need to get like, well, we actually tested her partner's stool, and because we wanted to see like maybe it would be easiest just to get it from him.
Right.
He had the exact same makeup as she did because they lived together.
Right, makes sense.
Which is so fascinating as well.
Probably similar diet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought was interesting was that you were basically doing a pilot study on yourself of how fasting affects female hormones, right?
Yeah.
So I'm actually curious, when I was looking into this.
I have more information on this, by the way.
Well, I think it's an interesting topic, and I think it's an important topic because most of the fasting studies are done on men, as you're referencing. And I don't think just for fasting, just most clinical studies are done on men, period.
Yeah.
And like American Western men, period. Just because like there's less variables and they're, I don't know, for whatever reason, just an easier population to sample from.
Yeah.
Or recruit from. I don't, and I think hopefully in the future we can affect that and have a more diverse population from which to run clinical trials. But that's a different conversation to be had.
Sure.
But I think one thing that was interesting was that there is some confusion around women and fasting, and like how much does urine hormone levels correlate to blood serum levels of hormones? I imagine there's obviously some correlation. So I moved to urine hormone testing for convenience mostly because, and also because I really like this company called Precision Hormones. Most functional doctors that I really, really trust are using Precision Hormones or ZRT labs to do really convenient home urine testing and hormone testing. And so they correlate pretty well. Okay. And I mean, the key is like, do you trust the company? Are they giving you information that's actionable? And like, is there good customer service in case you have questions? And so like I still do blood testing because it's the standard. Yeah. But then on top of that, it's really hard to do blood testing for the menstrual rhythm. And so because of that, it's just easier to pee on a piece of paper and to dry it and to send it in. Yeah. But I think they correlate very well. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is over the last month, when basically last 2 months, I've started to ramp up. Ever since that keto experiment, I started ramping up fasting. Yeah. And this last month, the previous month, my cycle was like shorter than it's ever been, right? And so that was interesting, right? And I don't know if that was if that came from the fact that I was traveling a lot, which is stressful, but usually when I'm stressed out, my cycle is longer. So I was kind of like, what is this about? And then the second time, this last month, I was wearing a glucose monitor, and like the previous month, my glucose monitoring was like pretty darn normal the entire time. But this last fast that I did 2 3-day fasts 2 weeks in a row. That might have been too much for my system to handle. And it was during my luteal phase. So my right before my period. And this last week when I was wearing my continuous glucose monitor, I refed on a retreat, right?
maybe not the optimal place to get refeeding because like I basically had only access to food that people were making us, and I broke some of my big rules, right? So I'm going from like ketosis to like ad libitum eating, right? And
like nachos and pasta and like easy to make stuff.
I didn't eat pasta, but we definitely made like pumpkin pancakes with brown rice flour, which I never eat flour of any kind unless it's like nut flours, and that's even still rare.
Right.
And then like I hadn't checked my glucose monitor until the next day. And so actually what did I first eat? I think I had some like tortilla chips and some granola and like some salad and some like whatever was laying around. I was just like
your sugar was.
So my sugar went. So first of all, you're not supposed to go from ketosis to carbs like that. Your body doesn't want to do that because you're physiologically insulin resistant, right?
Yeah.
So I hadn't been paying attention to my glucose monitor, and I also was slightly stressed from the drive. Yeah. I'd worked 4 hours on the drive, and then it was an unconference, and so I started giving a lecture on fasting right after this, right after eating.
Yeah.
And so the next day after breakfast, when I had those pancakes that I had made, which were, by the way, amazing, but like I never do that. I never eat pancakes with like rice flour. I looked at my monitor and I'm like, oh my God, this is bad.
What, 150?
Okay, so it was 187 after these pancakes. I went outside, did 30 minutes of yoga, dropped it to 107 in 30 minutes. From just
context, so above 125 fast is considered type 2 diabetic.
No, fasting, but I wasn't fasting. It was just postprandial. Postprandial 140 generally is considered to be like, but that's after a glucose tolerance test, which I basically had done.
Yeah.
But I was hovering around like, pre-diabetes range, pre-diabetes range, like 187 is really high. But like the cool thing is that I caught it.
Yeah.
It was only 30 minutes of an exposure, and I basically dropped it 80 points from yoga.
Yeah.
And I measured it from my finger prick as well, to make sure that it was accurate. Because when you see a glucose monitor, you have to understand that glucose monitors are imperfect.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes I'll see a spike after like a carb after fasting, and then I'll be like, uh-oh. And then I'll check it with my finger stick and double check to make sure that's not abnormal. And I've seen changes as much as like 30 points differences.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, is this as high as I think it is? And because I saw it and because I acted on it, I was like, great. I now know that like pumpkin rice flour is not optimal. Plus honey, like not good for my metabolism, especially not good after fasting.
Right.
But I think the thing I learned from this experience is that like, we need to be vigilant about our blood sugars and these experiments that we're doing, especially if you're a woman and you're challenging your body's physiology, especially around times like where there are hormonal differences going on. That's why I'm a big fan of continuous glucose monitoring, because like without knowing that, I could like if you like I was listening to Samaya, your friend who's a big faster, and I was looking at her Instagram, and I'm looking at her diet and what she eats on feasting days.
Yeah.
And she's eating a lot of refined carbohydrates. And like she's maintaining a healthy weight.
Right.
But I'm dying to see what her blood sugar looks like. I'm just dying to, because like I want to know, like, is it healthy or is it not? And like feeding and fasting, I think is like what we're designed to be doing as in terms of evolutionary biology. But the question is feasting on what? It's certainly not feasting on refined carbs and sugar.
Right.
Like maybe on special occasions, but on a day-to-day basis, like it could be detrimental to our metabolism to be challenging our metabolism with these types of behaviors.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point that I think is not super well understood, which is that insulin resistance actually increases after a fast, which is like counterintuitive, but in some sense, but it kind of makes sense that your body's not used to secreting
insulin decreases, but you can get insulin resistant because your brain is saying, if there is sugar in my body, it's coming to me first.
Right.
And so it's really just, your brain is doing this on purpose.
Right.
And
it's high fatty acids, which is like opposing to insulin.
Right.
Yeah.
It would make sense that by the way, when your body breaks down fat, triglycerides, when your body's breaking down, glycogen, initially it's producing carbohydrates from that, and then eventually you're in ketosis and your brain is still craving sugar. So if there's any sugar in your body from any place that's going to your brain, and your peripheral tissues are basically like trying to protect your brain.
Yeah.
And so it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I think that there are people, there's like certainly the high carb, low fat people who believe that fats are bad and fats cause insulin resistance and we're all gonna die. But like, I'm a big believer that like we should just understand what our body is trying to do in order to keep us alive. And also, like, with respect to that, be careful with how we experiment.
Yeah. No, I think I also want to underline it because I think you're being a really good point. So the brain needs sugar. And when you are in a ketogenic state, it's basically shuttling as much of the remaining glucose to your brain.
Yeah.
As opposed to just giving to your muscle. And your muscles are running off of fat.
Right.
Which is why people see weight management or weight loss goals off of ketogenic diets or ketosis. I think that's like interesting. It's an important way to look at it.
Yeah.
So you get that short-term insulin resistance. So your muscles aren't uptaking this much sugar.
Yeah.
And your body has to like have a few hours to readapt.
Right.
But that initial shock can have like high glucose for an extended period of time.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I think another topic that needs to be talked about is like, I've gotten a lot of people messaging me on Instagram who are bodybuilders who've experimented with ketosis.
Yeah.
And some of the men in particular have said, I started doing keto for many months while doing a really heavy lifting regimen, and I totally screwed up my hormones. So it's not just women. Like, this is happening to men as well. And so,
in what sense? Like the testosterone?
Testosterone, thyroid hormones, adrenal hormones. Like, basically, like, I think different hormonal systems can be thrown off from just too much famine. Yeah. Like, if you put your body in a famine, like, if you think about like a really lean, really muscular looking bodybuilder, like, their body fat is so low that their body's like, I'm in a fast.
That's the weakest state of their life.
It's not healthy.
Yeah. And
you may look really cool and you may look really shredded, but like, we need to actually ask ourselves, like, what is really optimal for longevity? And I don't know enough studies on bodybuilding to know, like, do they live longer? Do they live shorter? You know, what is the benefit to this long term besides aesthetics? Yeah,
that's a good point. So I do know when people are bodybuilding, they're cutting so much water, weight, and fat just before the competition. And oftentimes they say that they're literally the weakest they've been in their entire training cycle.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting conversation around the role of lean muscle tissue for glucose control.
Sure.
I think it's another area that I think hasn't been discussed as much, where I think a lot of people associate lean muscle tissue as correlated for longevity. And I think people think about that in the sense of, oh, you have more muscle, you're going to have like less prone to injury. But I think a less well understood point of that is that besides your liver, your muscles are where you can store glucose.
Yeah. Okay, so this is really important. Let's talk about
more
this.
Muscle, you can store more glucose.
So one of the things that most people don't understand about prediabetes that I think is like, I want to hammer into the world because the science is there, is that there's two types of prediabetes. You can actually technically three. There's impaired fasting glucose, there's impaired glucose tolerance, and then there's people who have both. Okay. Right? If you have impaired fasting glucose, you have hepatic insulin resistance, right? If you have impaired glucose tolerance, you have impaired skeletal muscle insulin sensitivity. So if you have both, then you're kind of screwed. So
let's drill into it. So to explain it for
so
your
muscles are a sink for glucose to go after meals, right? And then when your muscles fill up with glucose and there's no more space left for glycogen, you start taking that extra glucose and you start taking the triglycerides and you make you basically make fat, right?
Yeah, de novo lipogenesis.
Exactly.
My favorite phrase.
Exactly. So whenever you have extra glucose laying around, your body says, "Okay, cool, I'm going to store it. And then oftentimes, if you do this consistently, you get fatty liver, right? So if you fast, what you're doing is you're first and foremost eliminating the glycogen in your liver, right? When you exercise, you're eliminating the glycogen in both your liver and your muscles. So you're producing an insulin sink, you're producing a glucose sink, and you're also improving insulin sensitivity with exercise. And so I think
because you want to restore
exactly.
your body, your muscles want to uptake glucose after workouts.
Like one of the best things you can do if you're fasting is also continuing to exercise. Yeah. One of the worst things you can do if you're fasting is stay sedentary. One of the problems with fasting is that it does kind of send the signal to your body that like you don't want to move as much because you don't have as much fuel.
Right.
But I have found that so doing all these experiments with fasting, like it makes sense that I drop into ketosis faster when I'm exercising. But I've also noticed that like sometimes I get even better performance when I'm fasted, which is kind of interesting. I do Ashtanga yoga and it's not easy, but like I feel like I'm more focused and I feel like I've got more catecholamines in my body because I do. Right. And that gives me a little bit extra fuel to like really push into my exercise.
And it's aerobic, not doing anaerobic like
you're lifting your body with body weight, but you're also doing a lot of breathing. So it is both. Like you're doing a lot of...
You're probably not going like much above like 120, 140 heart rate, right? Like
I don't, not too much. It really depends on like, there are handstands that I'm doing sometimes where like, I'm lifting my whole body above my head. Okay. Yeah. And then arm stands, like those can be kind of trying.
I agree. Those
but
are
it's nowhere near as much.
Squatting like 300 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that most people, when trying to hack prediabetes and diabetes, like a lot of doctors are like, just focus on food, and food is important. But you also, exercise does really improve insulin sensitivity. Yeah. And also just like muscle mass. Turns out I was reading a study it was either, I think it was on human. I think I've read studies on both humans and animals, but extended day fasting can improve growth hormone secretion in both humans and animals, which also can improve your body composition. Yeah. And one of the weirdest things I've noticed from fasting is that even though I regain a lot of the weight that I lose when I start refeeding, I feel leaner overall. And so I do feel like it's changing my body composition, which is kind of cool.
You should get DEXA scan. So I did
do DEXA scan before I started doing all this. Yeah. So I'm going to do another one in one more month after 3 months of all this.
Yeah. And that's basically what I did. So I did a 3-month period of weekly 36-hour fast. And then I did a 7-day fast in between there as well.
One weekly 36-hour?
Yeah, so cool. Weekly 36-hour, and then in the middle was a 7-day straight water fast.
Oh, wow.
Aggressive.
Yeah.
Kind of a Phil Libben style fast. Yeah. And I had lost 2% of body fat percentage and gained like 1 or 2 pounds of lean muscle tissue.
Wow.
Which is like a nice combination, right? Yeah. Like you get leaner and you gain more muscle.
It's just funny though, because everyone's like, you're going to lose so much muscle. You're going to lose all your muscle by fasting. And I'm like, no, you're not actually. In fact, you might gain muscle and lose body fat.
If you work out.
You have to work out though.
That's the most anabolic thing there is. Like you don't like eat and build muscle. You have to work out and of course eat to gain muscle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Totally. I mean, that's the thing I try to tell people. It's like, but also the interesting thing is like, if you want to build like muscle like a bodybuilder, you actually do need a decent amount of insulin because you need a growth stimulus. Yeah. But if you're trying to lose body fat and gain muscle and just get leaner, then fasting and exercise is great. Yeah. I mean, you're a great example of this. I mean, just seeing you over the course of 2 years, like you've gotten way leaner, and it's awesome to see like your entire team. Like you guys are super lean people. Yeah,
no, it's been a fun journey just to sort of take what we experiment with, see that it actually works. I mean, I think we're just actually empiricists and scientists in some way, right? Yeah. Like if fasting didn't work for us, then we wouldn't do it. Like if I just like, I don't think we're dogmatic here.
No,
right? No. If you find out tomorrow that fasting's going to kill us, we'd be like, all right, let's not do that.
Okay. So another thing we should talk about is like the different types of fasting that I've personally done with different assistant aids. Okay. So I did my first 3-day fast with just tea and coffee with no creamer. Just mostly, I was drinking a lot of oolong tea. Okay. And because I was just like kind of going nuts a little bit because I was like, oh my God, no food. This is a lot of days.
Jason Fung's all about tea and fasting.
He nailed it. Like my ketone levels skyrocketed after one day. Yeah. Mostly I think because I was drinking so much tea. So by day 2, I was at like ketones of 4.4. Oh, okay. So that like you typically would see that after a few days. Yeah. But it was way sped up from just drinking tons of tea. Yeah. I discovered this like milk oolong tea, which is like amazingly good tasting. Okay. And then also this like pu'er from Rainbow Market that like I'm obsessed with. So like I'm really into teas these days. Yeah. The only concern I have about teas is my doctor told me that caffeine is not great for female hormones.
Interesting.
So I'm like, I can't give it up though. I love caffeine.
I didn't know about that. I mean, this
is something I've been reading more and more about. Like,
how strong is that?
It's pretty. I think it's a fairly strong association. Okay. However, I'm gonna do more deep research before I come to a conclusion because I've always been a caffeine drinker.
I know. I mean, just how many women do I see just walking around Starbucks all day long?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So it's like, Yeah. So the question is what's the dose? And then the other thing I did was a fat fast because I was like, oh, his complete guide to fasting says I can have fat for a fast. And it wasn't very much. It was like maybe 150 to 200 calories a day. Okay. And I have to say,
MCT oil or butter?
It was coconut oil, ghee, maybe 1 or 2 nuts. Okay. Definitely nothing crazy. Right. But I have to say that was a far harder fast to do. Huh. I think that when you give your body any type of calories, it's just like, wait, what? You're just giving me 200? Like that's it? And so my body was just like, nope.
Yeah.
So I hated that fast. That was like the worst fast. I was not happy.
That's consistent with my experience too. If you're going to eat, then your body just expects to actually have a real meal.
Yeah.
Like, are you really going to die over 200 calories?
Yeah.
Just like, if you're going to fast, just fast.
Okay. And then I did one of my previous 24-hour fasts when I was traveling to Israel with the ketone esters. And I'm sitting on Turkish Airways in business class because I decided beforehand I was going to upgrade because I was like, I deserve this. And did not realize how good their food was going to look. They had a chef on the flight and there was like food going back and forth.
International business is great.
Oh my God, it was ridiculous. But here's the thing. The guy sitting next to me is like this head of GE of Saudi Arabia, right? Okay. And he's sitting there like eating everything and watching me prick my fingers, test my ketones, drink human ketone esters, prick my finger again. Yeah. He's like, what are you doing?
Are you sick?
Who are you?
You have a disease.
What kind of person are you? Yeah. And I'm just like, oh, I'm doing all this metabolism research. And we started getting into like talking about why Saudi Arabia is just suffering so much from diabetes.
Yes.
And he was like, you're like in the future. He's like, you're literally from the future. He's like, this is where things are going to have to go because we're really getting, like our country's getting super sick.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, the problem is that like the solution is fasting and most people don't want to fast.
Right.
He's like, no, we're fasting for Ramadan. Like we're used to fasting. Like, he's like, you just got to tie in the cultural aspect of it and make it more of like a, you got to figure out how to get people to think about it from like that perspective as well, which I think is really smart. But I found that like international travel with ketones, really, really different experience than just regular fasting. Like, first of all, the first time I did, I was actually in your offices the first time I tried your ketones when I was doing a 16-hour fast.
Right.
I had a pretty decent like ketone level. I think it was like 0.8 or something.
Right.
And I was just like, what is this stuff? What am I going to be drinking? What is this like? Drank your ketones, and I remember thinking, I feel like I'm a video game character, and I'm getting a new life. Like I felt my legs sort of tingling, and I just felt like I had all this energy that was just like kind of like going from my feet to my head. And this keeps on happening every time I do a fast with ketones. Yeah. It's like I get this tingly feeling in my feet, like you're getting another life now, and it really does provide a sense of. Like, part of it is, I think, psychology because, like, I know that I have fuel, but part of it is physiology. Like, my body is getting a boost of ketones that, frankly, like, makes it easier to just, like, go into that state. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people who aren't fat adapted yet, this might be one of the few solutions that could actually help people learn to fast more efficiently. Like, my personal belief is that you need to really think about fat adaptation before jumping into fasting. But with this, I'm really curious to know, like, with this tool, can we get people to that state of fasting faster? And maybe can they use fasting to get fat adapted? Maybe they won't have to use ketogenic dieting. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And I think that's something that we're exploring. Obviously, a lot of our customers are athletes and performance use case. But I would say that maybe 20 to 30% of our customers are using it for a fasting tool for metabolic health.
Yeah.
Right. And I think what you're describing is that when people aren't fat adapted, you have low sugar and you have low ketones at the same time.
And then you feel like
shit.
Right?
so your body's just like, we need to eat something. Yeah. We're freaking out. But if you get that ketone load, right, equivalent to like 10 days of fasting in like 30 minutes.
Yeah. So this was me when I first started fasting, right? I would get hangry. I would be irritable. I would feel low energy.
Yeah.
And then through, basically when I was in your offices a few months ago, you were like, you just got to stick with it and just keep fasting and just try it.
Yeah.
Because it's going to get easier. And I was like, I really hope you're right. And then it did. And then the next thing I knew, every week I was like, I can do more. I can do more than this. And then two weeks of 3 days in a row, I was like, okay, I think I can do a little less.
Yeah.
But the fact that like, it's now something that I can just be like, oh, if I need to fast, I'm going to fast. And it's no longer like a thing that I worry about. Like, it's no longer even a question of, can I do it? That to me, like the coolest thing that I have found is the heart rate variability improvements. Have you heard about this work? Okay. So
I mean, I noticed I'm wearing an Oura ring now.
Yeah.
So like, I actually do see if I'm eating earlier to match. So basically I have a longer window before sleeping, my heart rate variability is higher and my resting heart rate is lower. Yeah. So it's like a more optimal heart.
Okay. So I've been finding all this research on how fasting improves heart rate variability.
Yeah.
And I put this to the test because I started fasting and I spent this year at the beginning of the year setting all my New Year's resolutions, and I set like tons of them. And I usually get more than half of them every year. It's like really fun to challenge yourself in every aspect of your life. But in terms of my own like emotional health, I wanted to be more even keeled under stress. I wanted to figure out like, how do I maintain balance despite a bigger workload? Because I knew I was going to be doing a lot more things than I was this year. I had a feeling this year is going to be a year of a lot of action. And it has been. And the craziest thing I've noticed through fasting is how I do feel like I can handle more stress and just remain calm. And I was traveling from Israel to Lebanon, which you're not supposed to do because they are not friends.
Right.
And I was like, well, I'm going to do this anyway because I'm Jewish, but I'm also Lebanese, and I'm like, no one's going to stop me. So I go to like Tel Aviv, and then I go to Cyprus, and then I go to Lebanon. Okay. And I get to Lebanon's border, and I think I'm like, oh yeah, home stretch. I'm going to get in. And the guy turns my passport over, and he sees
the Israeli passport.
He sees not the stamp; they sticker you. And in Israel, most people don't realize this, but these stickers have meaning behind them. They rank your level of Zionism, and it's their stickers, their own security stickers for when you come back to Israel.
Whoa!
Yeah. So I didn't know what number I was, but I was kind of like I had ripped off my previous sticker that I'd just gotten, but the one that was from before, it was like from 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was only half of a sticker, so I was like, I guess I could just leave it.
Right.
Big mistake. Guy says, come with me. And
so it was like super high in the Zionism ranking?
Well, no. This was Lebanon just knew that I was in Tel Aviv.
Okay,
and you're not allowed to go from Israel to Lebanon.
Okay.
Big no.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, they'll never know. I don't get stamped in Israel.
Yeah.
So I went to this back room, and there's people that are arguing with these border patrol guards. They're like, you can't kick us out of the country. And I'm sitting there just like smiling. And I turn my app on my phone, my Breathe app on my Apple Watch. I start breathing deeply. And I'm just like chatting up the people. I'm like, yeah, I was in Israel like 2 years ago. And because like I needed a good story because I wasn't going to be like, yeah, I was there like 2 hours ago or like 2 days ago. And the guys, I go, look, my last name's Maloof. I'm Lebanese. My dad's Lebanese. My grandfather's Lebanese. Like, I really want to see the country. That's why I'm here. And I was on a layover before.
Right.
And that's why I got that sticker. And he's like, and I was just really calm the whole time. And then he takes me to another room. And the other room was like, there's a guy in a jail cell. There's a guy at a desk. He's smoking a cigarette.
Damn.
And there's no windows. And it's fluorescently lit. And I'm just sitting there like, oh, shit. And he's like, okay, we need to take your statement for the military court. And I'm like, shit, am I going to jail?
Wow.
And I tell him my story, which, I'm not a big believer in lying, but if you're in a situation like I'm in, like,
I think it's excusable. It's excusable.
And so I go, look, I was this was actually a true story. I was in Athens a few years ago. I did have a layover in Tel Aviv. I showed him my stamps. I was like, this is when I was there. And so he takes my statement, and the guy barely speaks English, and he's using like copy paper, and they don't even have computers. It's like literally like he's handwriting it out.
Okay.
And he faxes it to the military court, right? They use fax machines. And I realized about halfway through this experience that like the guy was on my side because I look Lebanese. My last name sounds Lebanese. Right. My story, worked out, but I'm like sitting there for hours, and typically like, I think most people would have been kind of uncomfortable, you know? And I'm just like, I just like took the whole experience as like, you know what? This is going to be fine. Regardless of what happens, I'm going to be fine. If I have to go home, great. I'll go to another country. Like, whatever.
You weren't concerned about like just getting thrown in one of the cells?
Well, they let the guy out of the jail cell out, which was like, made me feel better.
Yeah.
He was from Paraguay apparently, and I didn't know what his story, I really didn't understand why they were holding him. But about 3.5 hours into this experience, we get a call, and they're like, you can go now. And I'm like, what do you mean I can go? They're like, yeah, you're free to go. I'm like, yes. And I just have the best high of my life. I got into Beirut. I had the best time, but like, I learned a lot about, like how to remain calm. And I honestly think that like, this would never have been me a year ago. I would never have been this calm under pressure. And the biggest change in my life over the last 2 months was literally fasting. And so I really do contribute. I really believe that this has contributed to like a greater improvement in my heart rate variability than anything else. Like it's pretty astonishing.
Yeah. I think part of it, from my perspective, is that it also practices discipline, right? Like you have a mastery over your own body's desires in some sense, right? Like eating's very pleasurable. That's what I've just noticed, through the fasting experience, that a lot of times when you eat, it's like for fun, not for actually
for hedonism, or because something smells good, or because like people don't really understand hunger.
Right.
And really true hunger is something that comes in waves throughout the day with ghrelin curves, right? So you get a few ghrelin curves throughout the day. And most hunger is actually just people who are constantly riding the glycemic response curve, and they're constantly spiking and dropping their blood sugar. And so they're getting low blood sugars. They're getting insulin spikes. Insulin makes you hungry. Yeah. So if you're constantly pulsing insulin throughout the day with sugar, you're getting hungrier because you're eating food that is making you hungrier, right? And on top of that, we get thousands of messages of food all day long to eat. And that activates the dopaminergic systems in our brain, the hedonism pathways, the pleasure pathways, the wanting and the liking of food. And that can make you think you're hungry, even though you're really you just want the food, or you just like the way food tastes. Right. And this is why when you're eating a multi-course meal, you're able to easily eat more food because of different foods tasting good continues to activate that pathway. And so it's not that you actually necessarily have room for all this food. It's that it's a novel experience.
Novelty factor, yeah.
Right? And then there's also like the emotional hunger that most people are suffering from in our country, because a lot of people are suffering from chronic loneliness, depression, anxiety. People are using food as a medication because carbohydrates activate serotonin, and that makes you feel better. For a lot of people, I think they're consuming carbs because their cortisol might be too high, and that makes you crave carbs, or they're just chronically depressed and they want to medicate. And it really, like, one of the things that I've been trying to understand more is like, what's true hunger? When am I really hungry? Right. And also when you're really hungry and you're fasting and you learn to handle that wave, and you realize that it's not a tidal wave, it's just a breaker, you're like, oh my God, I'm a superhero. Right. Like, I can handle anything. Like, I can be under a state of true hunger and be okay. And to me, like, that's an ultimately adapted human, is like, I could be anywhere in the world without food for a week if I needed to, and I would be fine. Yeah. And that's actually where we want to get people to go. But most people couldn't be without food for a few hours without falling apart.
Or so they think.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
So they think. I mean, that was me even a year ago. Yeah. Is like, maybe not a year ago, but like 2 years ago for sure. Yeah. I definitely would get hangry. I definitely would feel low blood sugar and be like, oh my God, I'm in survival mode. And you have to flip that brain switch and realize you're going to be fine. Yeah. And also, you've got enough food to eat because you have fat in your body. Right. And you're eating that fat when you're fasting,
One thing I thought was interesting was the benefits of having some insulin for bodybuilding or just for exercise. And I think that it's easy in a discussion like this to go super polar against carbs, like carbs are evil and all of that. And it's like, I think it's pretty well accepted. You probably don't need to eat refined sugar. Like, you can probably remove that, but there's a role for carbs, especially for weightlifting, exercise. I totally agree. We should talk about that. I mean, I think it's like we should find this. Well, yeah. I think there's like a nuance here where I feel like you don't get any attention if you're not just like crazy polar. Okay, that's happens with the political system. It's happening with like nutrition as well these days, I feel.
Great company called Metaflow that I may or may not start doing some work with them. Haven't yet, but I've just been using their device as a beta tester. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they measure your respiratory quotient. And I might have mentioned this in the previous podcast, but I've started to use them more. And what it does is it measures the...
How does it work?
You blow into this device, and you blow in oxygen, right? And then... can
we explain RQ before?
Yeah, so RQ is kind of tricky to explain, but basically the percentage of carbohydrates and fat that you are burning is can be determined by the difference in in carbon dioxide blow off that you create, like the difference in the oxygen you blow into the device and the carbon dioxide you blow out, and that ratio of I think I'm like bastardizing this. This is terrible. I did a really good job on their video of explaining this, but fundamentally, like, you have two sources of fuel that you can burn. You can burn fats or carbs. And the percentage that you're burning of fats or carbs is your respiratory quotient. Yep. And
ratio closer to 1 is carb burning, ratio closer to 0.7 is fat burning.
Exactly. Yeah. So this device can tell by the carbon dioxide blow off how much you are actually burning. Yeah. So what's nice about this is that it's really a tool for assessing your metabolic flexibility, which is really like how easily do you convert back and forth between carb burning and fat burning. Yeah. And what they've noticed in their program is like what they'll do is they'll cycle carbohydrate consumption with like higher carb with lower carb. And they're having people lose pretty significant weight loss, like 15 to 20 pounds weight loss from just using this device and just modulating carbohydrates. And I think that, obviously I'm waiting to see like the totals numbers of what their success stories are. And I'm also just like, I have a lot of research to do in this space to really, before I totally convert over to like, this is the future.
Right.
But I think I think having a glucose monitor is a pre-cellular tool for analyzing your fuel stores. It's like what's in your bloodstream.
Right.
But then post-cellular is the respiratory quotient. It's like, what have you already metabolized? And I think both of these together is a pretty magical combination because now we're starting to get real-time fuel store analysis.
Yeah.
And that's pretty astonishing.
Yeah, the RQ has been interesting. I've been meaning to get that done. I know it's interesting that you can have it in a device. Because I know that typically today you are doing like VO2 max tests. I mean, you're literally wearing a rebreather and like getting this analyzed.
Right.
So it's cool that they've come up with such a small, seemingly,
Yeah. I mean,
nice
really, the sensors have just gotten cheaper.
Yeah.
They've gone from hundreds of dollars to like tens of dollars. And so because of that, they can make it something more scalable.
Yeah. So I think one of the early pilots of ketone ester showed that your RQ is more efficient while using ketone ester versus other substrates. So it's one of the starting principles that like led down to the development of the ketone ester.
Oh my God. Wow.
Because if you actually think about, why is the ratio closer to 1 when you're burning carbs? It's like carbohydrates are more oxidized. There's more oxygens in a carbon molecule versus a fatty acid chain.
Yes.
Right. And ketones look more like a fatty acid chain than a carbon molecule.
Right.
So it's an interesting substrate to be more efficient for metabolism. Right.
And the thing about, I think, human health and adaptation, this concept of like being able to adapt and self-manage, being metabolically flexible, I think is a marker of a healthy human.
Yep.
And there's a great paper, I'll send it to you, and it's called Flipping the Metabolic Switch and why this is important for health span and lifespan. And really the belief is that the more often you can go between carb burning and then also depleting your glycogen reserves, like that in itself is like really good for your metabolism long term. Yeah. And it may be that being sustained in a ketotic fat burning state isn't good long term. It may be that is damaging to hormones if you do it too much.
Right.
It may be that we're supposed to go back and forth.
Right.
Or maybe or it's possible that like seasonally we're supposed to eat differently. I mean, there's so much we need to learn about like what makes for the healthiest lifestyle possible. Right. But I think it makes intuitive sense. And also there's a lot of papers on this now that say that we should be tapping into our own fat stores more often. Right. We should not be burning carbs consistently. And that's what most people are doing. And it's not surprising that most people have too much blood sugar in their bloodstream.
Yeah. I mean, I would respond by saying that I think sustained keto is likely to be safe, just given out all the longitudinal studies on keto. Mm-hmm. But I would say that I think it is open, as you were saying, that it's not necessarily optimal. Like I think, I think there's a point around cyclical keto, right? And
that's what I'm thinking more about.
I think that's something that I've been incorporating.
Yeah.
Because I know just from like an exercise perspective, like if you are just eating keto, you're just not going to have that burst energy. And like all of the elite athletes that we work with, they might train ketotically to be more metabolically flexible.
Yeah.
But during their like Olympic trials or their games, they're getting a full fuel selection.
Well, let's think about that, right? So if you think about, I always like use the candle kindling analogy, but if you have a bunch of kindling and you light it on fire, it burns real fast. Yeah. It's like you want that kindling in your body. You want that glycogen so you can burn it. Yeah. So you can run, so you can produce power, energy. Like our bodies are not that, like they're so complicated, but they're not, right? Yeah. Now, we don't, like, to me, ketones is kind of like a little bit of rocket fuel, right? Yeah. Like that's cool that you can pour a little bit of extra fuel onto a body and say, I'm going to have this like extra fuel stores. But most of us, like just using our own fat stores for an Olympic trial, that's like burning a candle. It's not going to burn fast. Yeah. You want to have that fast burning fuel for power. And what I'm trying to figure out right now as I dig deep into fitness and continuous glucose monitoring is, how do we use the glucose monitoring tool to optimize human performance in athletics? Right. And right now I'm getting so much of my evidence from type 1s because they're the ones who've been monitoring this the longest, but I don't have enough research from people who are healthy. And so, like we're going to have to start doing some studies eventually on that.
Yeah, that reminded me of a point that I wanted to bring up, which is that the metabolic flexibility point. So there's been good success where diabetics are going on keto and then reversing their blood sugar and reducing their insulin load, right? You need less medication. But I think there is a good, interesting open question around, have they really reversed diabetes or cured diabetes, or they just manage the symptoms?
This is a good,
right?
really good question.
No one has tried to refeed them carbs.
Right.
Right. Like, it sounds like you have really good glycemic control. Like,
well, except for after
after fasting.
A fast when I didn't.
Yeah.
There is evidence that shows that for some women who have already normal glycemic control, if you do fast them, there can be abnormal glucose tolerance after. But here's the thing. Does that mean I'm permanently have abnormal glucose tolerance, or was that a temporary state?
Right.
Now, let's get back to diabetes. I think a lot of people focus so much on these clinical endpoints and measurements and less about the big picture of what's really going wrong with this person's health. Mm-hmm. And diabetes is not just a disease of too much blood sugar. It's a disease of a person who is not adapting to the environment that they're living in. And by not adapting to the environment, I mean they're not getting enough sunlight. They're not getting enough nature exposure. They're not getting enough fresh air. They're getting way too much pollution. They're getting the wrong packaged processed foods in their bodies.
Right.
They're oftentimes not getting enough family and community time. And there's a lot of reasons why all of these things contribute to abnormal blood sugar. To me, abnormal blood sugar is just an endpoint that's showing a person is breaking down. And it's yes, you can treat the symptoms. You can treat the problem you can treat the insulin resistance. You can treat the high blood sugar. But it's not fixing the societal issues that are contributing to people's health getting, disordered.
Right.
And I think the same thing can be said about hypertension and hypercholesterolemia. These are just markers of an unhealthy person.
Yeah.
And these are markers that show that you can be predisposed to pathology. But it's let's look at the big picture of society and say, where are people thriving without any of these problems, and what's different about their lifestyles? Yeah. And frankly, a lot of it has to do with how people live, what their lifestyles are like.
I think eventually everyone's going to converge, and we all need to build a giant culture company.
We do.
I think it's basically what we're all trying to do in our various channels, right?
Yeah.
You've mentioned cholesterol. Have you been following the LDL, HDL,
oh my God, yes,
triglyceride story?
Okay. So
that's something I've been curious about and become amateur lipidologist. But
oh my God,
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that whole story around how high LDL might not necessarily be a demonized biomarker.
Well, okay, so
I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
I don't know if I mentioned this to you. I don't think this was on the last podcast, but as I was digging into diabetes treatments from nutritional treatments, I came across a high carb, low fat group and a low carb, high fat group, right? Yeah. Well, let's not name these groups, but you know who they are. One of them is in San Diego, one of them is in San Francisco.
Okay.
And I was looking at their numbers and their outcomes, and I was like, oh my God, both groups are seeing the same drop in hemoglobin A1C, and both groups are seeing the same drop in weight in the course of a year. And I'm like, what's going on here? Okay, how is this possible? But then I said to myself, okay, let's see what the literature says about both of these types of diets and what changes in terms of blood markers that are problematic that they weren't reporting. Well, typically what you see in the high carb, low fat group is they elevate their triglycerides. Typically what you see in some people in the high fat, low carb group is you do see some people get high LDL. And I'm one of those people.
Me too, actually. My LDL raises.
My LDL goes up. Yeah. But the question is
bad?
Both of those are considered to be bad endpoints according to the American Cardiology Association. Right. But should we be worried about them? Right. My personal belief is that this is just first principles at work, right? I have an ApoE4 gene. I have a few genes that predispose me to being at risk for high cholesterol if I eat lots and lots of saturated fat.
So the ApoE4 for Alzheimer's as well.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And basically anyone with an ApoE4 needs to be careful about too many refined carbs and too much saturated fat.
Don't take brain hits.
Thank God I have not had any concussions.
Yeah.
But I haven't experimented yet with the high carb, low fat diet. Yeah. I'm terrified of doing it, but I also kind of think it'd be fun to just eat vegetables and fruit for a month and see what happens to my body.
Right.
I've never done it before, but what would happen? What would I feel like? Who knows? Right. And what I really want to know about these two groups of people is who are the failures and what happened to those people? What's going on with the people who failed the keto diet? What's going on with the people who failed the carb diet?
Right.
And also maybe we need to meet somewhere in the middle. And so what I'm proposing right now that we're doing with Sano, we're doing some internal studies where we're taking people on regular diets, giving them the continuous glucose monitors for a week just to see what happens by monitoring their food. And then we're going to give them a plant-based diet with some protein mostly plant-based, but with some protein diet from a very popular delivery company in the San Francisco area. And we're going to see what happens when you take a person on like a normal type diet with standard American foods to whole foods. Because my theory is that part of what's wrong with people's diets is that they're eating all this fake, crappy food that's like not contributing to a healthy metabolism. And then maybe what's happening with these people with different macronutrient ratios is like they're getting on whole foods.
Right.
They're getting on real foods. And maybe that's why everyone's getting the same drop in hemoglobin A1C and weight.
I think that's I actually agree with that, actually. I think that a large contributing factor when people change to one of these quote unquote fad diets is that they're just probably eating healthier.
Yeah, they're eating, and the thing is,
they're eating
rules
whole
now.
foods, right? They
have
rules
now.
And I think there is some interesting, that's something that I think is going to be interesting to debate and discuss in the literature. I think there's clearly people that see success with high carb, low fat. Mm-hmm. There's clearly people that see success with the complete opposite.
Yeah.
And it's like I think it's cheap to be like, no, you're lying or you're BSing to either side. It's like maybe there's some genetic component to that we just don't fully understand. Mm-hmm. Or maybe both routes could work.
Well, what I think is that
depends on your use case.
A healthy, like the thing that I'm trying to constantly evolve my own perspectives around, and what I'm trying to do to sort of separate myself from the pack is like, how do we move away from just being so overly focused on clinical endpoints and so overly focused on signaling pathways and start looking at the macro picture of humanity and saying like, what would the most adapted, evolved human look like? Yeah. Right? How are we going to get to because we're going through a massive human evolution right now. Yeah. Like with technology, with all this information, with all these new tools that we have to advance our physiologies and our lifestyles, like how do we become a more evolved human in the future? And what does that look like? And to me, it looks like, how can I take whatever fuel supply available to me? By the way, by fuel, I do not mean packaged processed crap. I mean fuel, real food. How do I take whatever food's available to me and metabolize it effectively without having problems? Yeah. And like, to me, that's what I want to be. I want to be able to go anywhere in the world, eat for the most part any healthy whole food and not get sick and actually metabolize it well. And like, that's that to me is like a superpower, and that's what we all should be. I think we should be striving for potentially. Now, the only issue with that argument is that like the microbiomes of the food supplies all over the world do sometimes cause people to react differently. Yeah. So it would be really cool if I could just go to India and eat whatever I wanted. But I do have a feeling that like I might get sick still occasionally.
All of us are probably gonna have some GI distress.
Like we might. I think part of the reason why Americans probably do get sick when they travel a lot is because we have very weak microbiomes because we've assaulted them with antibiotics for many, many years. Yeah. And we know now that like a lot of these fake sugars and these preservatives are maladaptive to the microbiome. Yeah.
But I would say that probiotic foods like kimchi or sauerkraut, I think they're getting more popular. But hopefully I
ferment my own yogurt. I make my own kombucha. I make my own vinegar now. I make my own lacto-fermented vegetables.
You gotta eat at your place. I mean, one thing that I thought was interesting was why isn't there like full-fat milk yogurts? Like no, like everything.
You can get them now.
I see that.
But they're all filled with sugar though. There's so much sugar.
That's a problem with yogurt. It's like 20 grams of sugar right in there.
I did find at Bite Right Market this sheep's milk yogurt, full fat, that's like amazing. Like totally delicious, like over the top good, creamy and just incredible, super easy to digest, kind of expensive, but really good. Yeah.
No, going back to your point around just being metabolically flexible to be able to consume any sort of fuel. I think that's actually, I would actually very much agree with that. It reminds me of something that Jordan Peterson, who you guys might have heard about.
Yeah, I've been wanting to meet politics.
This guy. He's interesting because he's carnivore and keto. He's carnivore.
Really?
His daughter, who Zill's talking with, she's pretty public around having autoimmune issues.
Okay.
And basically resolved it with going carnivore, like keto. Completely? And then going carnivore.
Wow. Well, so here's the thing. Like, I think that my question around all of this is like, what happens to your microbiome when you just eat meat? Like, do you how do you grow a healthy microbiome without fiber?
I think the counter argument there would be, well, if you eat offal, like the liver, kidney,
There should be a lot of nutrients in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can balance it if you actually if you just eat hamburger meat or like sausages. Yeah, you're not getting that diversity within just protein.
You can certainly get enough vitamins and minerals, but the question is like, are you going to grow like a healthy microbiome typically likes fiber to make small chain fatty acids, right? And that feeds that mucosal layer.
Right.
So I would want to do a stool study on these people and find out what does their microbiome look like. Yeah. And yes, maybe they've quelled the inflammation and reduced, maybe some small bacterial intestinal overgrowth or whatever. But the real question is like, is that long-term healthy? And like, I would also want to measure Jordan's ferritin levels, because there is a pretty significant correlation between high ferritin levels in men and heart disease. Yeah. And so like, look, because I've done so much research in nutrition, and I am at the point where I really feel like nobody really truly understands what's correct for humanity. Like, I will admit that
it has to be bespoke.
The more that I learn, the more that I don't trust like anyone. But at the same time, the more that I'm striving to like think about the big picture. Yeah. And the reality is that if you look at Eskimos, they're eating a crap ton of animal foods, right? So I mean, maybe if he's eating healthy animals, he's evolved and he's evolving to consume this. Yeah. And also, like, I do know people. There's a really great story about this guy who survived. He was like the sound engineer for the Grateful Dead. He ended up getting esophageal cancer and living off of meat for like 15 years, like a meat slurry. He was like literally starving his cancer. So, like it can be done. You can survive on this. But the question is do you want to? Right. Like, I personally love food so much, but I'm also, like, if I had cancer, what would I try? Like, would I go Gerson? Would I go carnivore? I'm a big believer that we're going to have an entire array of like diets for cancer in the future. Yeah. For different types of cancer. There's so much to be thought about when it comes to different diets for different therapeutics.
So I brought up Jordan because I think he has a saying around that the goal of life, for a meaning of life, is not to just to win in a specific game, but to have a strategy that wins in the set of all possible games. I think
that's great.
Which is like interesting when I think about like, how do you want to carry out your life?
Yes.
Right? Because if I, win in this one little game that we play and let that really make you feel bad, then we're never going to play a game again.
That's where fasting is beautiful, by the way, because fasting wins in so many cases. Like, fasting is a strategy that I think can help you. Like, I've noticed that since I started fasting, I can eat a lot more of a diverse diet and maintain the same weight. Yeah. I can actually tolerate a lot more foods and still like, and also I can have like a day where like I do cheat a little bit and I can recover a lot faster. Yeah. Like, that's to me a pretty great example of someone who's like winning in different environments. Right, and hence
the metabolic flexibility. Yeah. Right. And I think that maybe the solution is not just have a 30-30-30 macro, but like just swing
I think
from
it's
like
moving around.
Keto to like high carb. And then, like,
I think your metabolism wants to be surprised. Yeah. I think in fact, I think it had historically been surprised quite a lot with whatever was available. Right. And so that we may still have that genetic makeup, and that could explain why a lot of people tend to do well when they shift their macronutrients around. They see changes in their body composition.
Right. Yeah, I think that's it's definitely something to be explored. Because I know that a lot of the cyclical work of cyclical keto over at the Buck Institute, which is well-regarded longevity institute, is showing that like cyclical keto is just as good as normal keto. And this is done on mice.
Can you define that, by the way?
I think they're putting mice on 2 weeks of keto and then 2 weeks of standard Western diet.
Cool.
And they were living longer than standard Western diet.
I think you see very similar studies with like every other day fasting in animals, or even extended fasts in animals. Like you just see them live longer. Yeah. And you know what I love about fasting is how my skin looks so great when I fast. Like, I swear to God, this thing called, have you heard of autofluorescence?
We're talking about this. Yeah.
You can actually measure the light output of a person's skin. And that correlates to the level of advanced glycation end products. So the more advanced glycation end products that your skin accumulates, the older your skin looks, the more wrinkles you get, because the more damage to the proteins in your skin, the collagen and the elastin. Right. And so what I've noticed is that with fasting, I just start seeing my skin start glowing after a few days. It's pretty cool. Like, I know I'm like I'm this crazy convert, but I have to admit, you guys are pretty much responsible for this transformation. You and Phil.
But I think there's some rhyme to that madness in the sense that like some people look healthier and maybe it's an autofluorescence.
Yeah. I mean, you're also
Right?
taking out the garbage of your cells.
Yeah.
You're like upregulating all these anti-aging pathways. But oh my God, the coolest thing I learned was listening to this podcast by Krista Tippett called On Being.
Okay.
She was interviewing a theoretical physicist who was talking about how time is all relative and time doesn't actually exist, right? But it's the difference between variables and specifically heat.
Okay.
And so one of the things that he was saying is that basically like heat exchange over time kind of helps define time, right? Like the fact that like
it's basically the entropy.
Yes,
story.
exactly.
Okay.
And so what I'm thinking is happening when you're fasting is you're actually just decreasing entropy because you're reducing heat exchange in your body.
That's a funny way to think about it.
But think about it.
Yeah,
it's like,
no, I think it's an interesting way to think about it.
It actually is very simple physics. Like, and to me, I'm really attracted to like beautiful, elegant theories of science. Right. And I know I'm producing less heat when I'm fasting because I'm cold. Like I know when I'm cold and I know when I'm warm. And I love the feeling of understanding what's going on inside my body. And I do think that like fasting is a way to like literally reverse the clock in your cells by just the change in heat exchange.
That's funny. I didn't think about it from the entropy story. I think that's a funny way to think about it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Maybe I'm wrong, but it makes sense to me scientifically. So I'm going to go with it.
I mean, I think the heat thing, I think is from a slowing of metabolism more than.
Yeah, but that in itself is also.
Which I think, again, so
reduces entropy, you know?
Yeah.
So
yeah, what are the big things? So like busy 2018 so far.
Yeah. So last time we talked, you were like, I think at the end, I remember listening to the podcast and you're like, wait, that's it? Is that all you're going to do? And then after the podcast, I was like, I guess I should do more things this year. So I've been working at Sano a couple days a week. I've been actually using a lot of the learnings that I've gotten from fasting and continuous glucose monitoring to sort of redesign my practice around a metabolic flexibility program, which I'm continuing to work on. And we'll hopefully roll out sometime this summer with like a beta test group where what we'll be doing is we'll be teaching people from like a firsthand experience with monitoring their blood sugar, their ketones, their respiratory quotient, and basically teaching people how to become metabolically flexible through different dietary changes as well as through fasting. Yeah. So ketone esters will certainly hopefully be a part of that because I think that getting people past that inflection point is really challenging.
Yeah.
And then I have been working on developing a podcast myself. So I hope to launch that in July. And then I've been doing a little bit of...
What's it going to be called?
I don't know yet. I don't have a good one.
All right.
I need a name. If you can help me think of a good name, like that's one of the things that's keeping me from like fully pushing it out yet. But it's going to have to be good. I don't know what it's going to be right now. So if anyone has any good ideas, please come to my Instagram, drmolly.co, and give me your ideas because I need some. And then I've done some
Dr. Molly show.
I mean, I was thinking that Dr. Molly show or like Dr. Molly on and then ... or something because it's going to be different on different topics. Yeah. But I've been doing some wellness travel excursions. I went to Esalen Institute and taught a bunch of executives all about how to plan your life like a startup and how to really like create systems for setting goals for your year and really actualizing those goals and really just analyzing how can you make progressive improvement in your life over time. I'll be doing that again in August. And then I'm trying to think of all the other things. So I'm still advising a few companies and I have, a few months ago, I was like really getting a little burned out from work. And so I started traveling a little bit. So I did a bunch of travel and now I'm kind of getting back into the whole like, okay, I need to hustle again. Yeah. So really I'm just trying to roll out the podcast. I'm just working on this product at Sano as well. And like trying to get some preliminary studies really designed well where what we want to do is we're doing accuracy studies right now just to really prove that we're equivalent to the existing tools on the market. And then we want to start studying different interventions, different nutritional interventions to see how do we continue to teach people how to lower postprandial glucose and lower fasting glucose. And I've also developed some products in the meantime. I've developed a skin product that, really has like changed my skin dramatically. So I'm working on the labeling over my next vacation with my family in July. And then I'll be testing this out on my community before I actually launch a website around selling it.
Very cool.
And then I'm trying to work on...
What's the secret magic sauce or what are the...
It has about 15 different oils.
Okay.
It has base oils. It has sort of, they call bonus oils, which are like, they're active oils, but they're not essential oils. And then it's got essential oils. And then it also has like a super hyper potent stabilized vitamin C. And then it also has a couple absolutes. So it's got a really amazing smell. Like it just smells like magical on your skin. And then it has some preservatives that are plant-based preservatives. So it's pretty like, it does have one product that comes from an animal. It has an emu oil in it, which I'm going to replace, I think, with macadamia oil just for the vegans. Because I know that vegans are not going to want animal-based stuff. And then I'm also I'm actually working on putting a sunscreen into this because I want this to be like an all-purpose skin product that essentially just does everything you need it to do for your skin. Because I'm trying to become as minimalistic as I can. As I start digging into fertility and understanding health, I'm starting to realize that all these beauty products that I'm putting in and on my body are just not healthy. And so I'm trying to develop a product that is all-purpose, singular tool that just, you only will need to put this on your skin and you're going to be good. So that's what I'm working on. I
mean, if I said anything about not needing more stuff now, I mean, now you have a lot on your plate for the rest of the year.
I have a lot on my plate. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. I mean, thanks so much for coming by. I mean, this was actually going to be the last podcast taped in this studio.
Oh my God.
So you're closing out this version of the Human Podcast.
Wow, this era. Honestly, I keep on listening to your podcast, and just from the very, very beginning to now, I'm so impressed with just how you guys have evolved. Like, I love your work. I'm a fangirl of Human. You guys are great. I actually doubted you.
I'm a fangirl of Molly.
I doubted you guys so much when I first met you, and now I'm like, all right, I'm joining the club.
Thanks so much.
Sure.
We'll have to have you on in our new studio in the coming months. And I think it sounds like you're going to have a lot to report back on.
I sure am, yeah.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
I know a lot of you guys have been writing in at podcast@human.com for different questions or topics or subjects that you'd like myself and our research lead, Dr. Brianna Stubbs, to cover. So let's actually make a Q&A special episode to answer any and all of your questions relating to our own personal performance protocols, our research and backgrounds as biohackers and scientists and business people, to what's going on at Human. What projects are we working on? What R&D are we working on? What customers? What are the feedback from the ketone ester? Happy to address any and all questions. So shoot us an email at podcast@human.com. And once we have a big bank of questions, we'll do a special episode. As always, please subscribe for future episodes of the Human Enhancement Podcast. Give us a 5-star review on iTunes and send a screenshot to podcast@human.com, and we'll send you a free Sprint Mini, our acute focus nootropic. Thanks so much, and see you next time.